Conversations with Ed Marshall is underwritten by EMA Consultants and Speakers Bureau, Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, SafePoint GPS, Delgado Community College, and OTP Poetry Anthology.
Award-winning broadcast journalist Ed Marshall asks the tough questions you want answered. Informative, soul-stirring, one-on-one interviews about matters that affect our lives in this region we call home. Here now with Conversations is Ed Marshall.
Welcome to Conversation. Glad you could be with us. If you thought the global pandemic with the coronavirus is over, the Louisiana Department of Health says think again. The state reports show that 363 new coronavirus cases have been reported to the state of Louisiana since October 4th. Since the beginning of the pandemic, at least 1 in 3 Louisiana residents have been infected. And that's a total of over 1 million people that have been reported with these cases. At least 1 in 257 residents have died from the coronavirus, totaling some 18,097 people. An average of 318 cases per day were reported in Louisiana just this past week. And even though cases have decreased by 46% from the average 2 weeks ago, deaths have increased by 44%, unfortunately. Well, a local organization wants to move beyond numbers. These were people, these were mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandparents, and so much more. They were more than statistics. These were lives lost to this terrible virus. A local organization has decided to honor the men, women, and children that are no longer with us. That organization is the Black Men of Labor of New Orleans. And to tell us more about honoring lives that have been lost is the president and CEO of the Black Men of Labor, Mr. Fred Johnson, and he will be joined by the CFO of Black Men of Labor, Mr. Todd Higgins. But let's first start with Mr. Johnson. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for
Appreciate
having
it. Todd, good to see you.
Good morning, Ed. How are you?
All right. For those, of course, we're going to get into why you all are doing what you're doing, but for those who don't know about the Black Men of Labor, quickly tell our viewers who you are and what you do.
Well, basically, first of all, thank you, Ed, for having us. The Black Men of Labor was created as a result of one of our famous musicians named Danny Barker. And Danny single-handedly resuscitated the brass band genre by creating the Fairview Baptist Church Brass Band. So history would have it, when Danny passed, he told his wife not to bury him with a brass band because it had taken a bad turn. We convinced Miss Barker at that time to allow us to bury Danny in the brass band tradition, and we did, and it took off. And the music was so powerful, and when we got to the cemetery, the guys kept saying, "Hey, we need to do this again." And I said, "Yeah, not with a body." And the next thing you know, we organized a Blue Monday meeting. Excuse me. And we thought that we would create the group in honor of Danny Barker. We're keeping the traditional brass band music on the street. And that meant the musicians were in black and white. And we then decided to take the option to put the African garb in the parade, because all of what we do here in that tradition was created and come from out of West Africa.
Right.
As time would have it, we then dovetail into some other aspects in terms of helping the community with the Reentry Act and so forth and so on. But primarily, the basis of the organization was to put the traditional music on the street with the men in black and white, because the music is respected around the world, and we saw where by Danny, we needed to not reinvent it, but just add another spoke to what Danny had already started. And the musicians that know the traditional music, that wear the black and white, I can single-handedly, unequivocally say that by far they're better paid, because they have a better genre of music, and they have what people around the world want from New Orleans, which is the traditional music.
The original. Mr. Higgins, tell us about the fact that one of the things that Black Men of Labor wanted to do was to make sure that the young people, the new generation of musicians coming up, would be taught the real thing, the real African American, the African music that was traditional, that came here with the Africans from Africa.
Well, as Fred said, you know, the music that the musicians before Sidney Bechet, Danny Barker, Louis Armstrong, they had made music that the world loved. They got to play for kings and queens. They got to play for nations, presidents. When you have now the new generation coming on, that kind of history is not being taught in school books, not being taught. So it's passed down from generations to generations of those who really want to learn. So that's why, as Fred said, keeping the traditional jazz music alive was a point to make sure the young men and women know, if this is what you want to do, this is how it's played, this is where it come from. And it's a good feel because most of, not knocking anybody's genre or any group, most of the music that Louis Armstrong made, still out here years later. Most of the music, King Oliver, Sidney Bechet, still out here. Most of the groups who make music, it's here today, gone tomorrow. So, and a lot of it is being sampled from the older musicians. So it's something that they really need to know, as well as the culture. You know, you may see something, you know, Street Parade been around a long time, and it comes out of West Africa. So it's basically something that we've adapted to and try to teach and educate. And when we look at our annual parade, we look at it as being a mobile museum, because you can go in a museum in any city, state, and look at pictures on the wall and have a curator tell you, well, when the Black Men of Labor hit the street, it's a mobile museum. You're getting the African culture, you're getting the traditional music, and then behind the scene, you're getting a lot of architect that when we go through historic Treme, you get to see. So it's a lesson being taught constantly.
Okay, well, let's circle back to the coronavirus. There's been really nothing that's been said about the people that have been that passed on because of the virus, and I applaud the Black Men of Labor saying, look, we want to not let these people be forgotten, and so now you all are having a global ecumenical prayer, gospel, and jazz service celebrating those that were lost in the pandemic, and it's going to be October 23rd. So tell us more about that.
Well, during the 2 years we were isolated, you know, at home, you know, we talked about what was going to happen next. Last year, the mayor, things had changed. A lot of the groups hit the street. We wind up having a health fair. So this year, before getting back on the street, Fred decided, we talked about it with the membership, of having something to pay respect and tribute, not only to those who died, but to the men and women who were on the front line, the healthcare workers, the funeral homes that work through dignity, the police, the essential personnel. So we, as a group, we decided before getting back on the street that we would hold this ecumenical service to unite not only the city, but pay respect to all those who lost, not just in New Orleans, but globally. New Orleans is home to 57 different embassies, 37 embassies and offices are held here, and 13 consul general offices are held here. So basically, in partnership with them, we're trying to make sure that everybody, you know, from the Black Men of Labor standpoint, we're saying, hey, thank you. Thank you for the work you've done for the healthcare workers who stayed on the front line. Thank you for the funeral homes who honor these people with dignity, because most people couldn't have a general funeral home like we have in New Orleans. So it was basically, you may have 2 or 3 family members come and seeing, and that was it. And we just wanted to make sure that history would be recorded right, that, hey, we just didn't forget these people. As you said, there were mothers, fathers, children, you know, families of people. You know, sometimes you had a mother, father, and a son die. You know, so generations was lost, and we just want to show them that, hey, we see, we know, we feel, and we felt that the ecumenical service would be a good way to unite, bringing people together so we can lament together, so we can mourn together, and also celebrate their lives together. And that's what it's all about.
And it's going to take place at a very significant place, which is the Mahalia Jackson Theater, and which is very, very significant. And of course, it you know, it seats a lot of people. And this is a free event, of course. But people do need to know that they need to call in and get some tickets, right? Because you know, you just can't just flood the place with fire marshal ain't gonna allow that.
No, well, definitely that's true. There's limited seating. There's 2,100 seats that hold in the Mahalia Jackson Center, but there's limited because you have to procure a ticket. It's free, but you have to go online at info@thebmwl.org to get your ticket, and it's a 2-ticket limit. So if you're interested in coming here, some prayer, some encouragement, some enlightenment from 12 different faiths, all congregations that we practice the faiths here in New Orleans, whether it's Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Unitarian. We've invited ministers from every faith to come give words of encouragement, prayer, and then we have great music from Dr. Michael White, Herlin Riley, Topsy Chapman, Tanya Boyd. It's just a group of people that came together and said, hey, we want to do this, and they partnered with the Black Men of Labor to do it, and it could not have not been done without the generous donation from and support of the Bob Moses Foundation, along with the City of New Orleans Culture and Tourism Fund. And there were other sponsors, but we really want to thank those who really believed in the Black Men of Labor to get this done. And we hope that everybody, call in, get your tickets, and come celebrate in a day of joy and a day of respect. And after that, we'll have a historical jazz funeral procession.
Yeah, I was going to ask Fred about that, because that's your bailiwick. So after everything happens inside the theater, you all got to take to the streets. Tell us about it.
Well, as Todd said, the premise of this was to make sure that one, we don't step on the spirits of our ancestors, and that has to do with paying respect and being respectful. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. And we had the choice of just going along and get along. And I want to go back to something that you all talked about earlier. And here's what history then taught us, is that fads don't last. Right. So when you're playing with this music and you're playing these fad genres, history then taught us that fad don't last. The problem we have is that most of us don't want to study history. So when you don't know where you come from, you have no way to know where you're going. But the Black Men of Labor, and I thank them, because I brought the idea to the table after looking at all of the newsreels and all of the debt globally. Yeah. I'm like, this is insane. This is not acceptable. And I had it to happen close to me, where my brother-in-law contracted it, his mom contracted it, and they never knew each other, and he died, and then she died, and she passed, and she never knew our son passed. Wow. So, but I'm looking at this, and then I'm looking at the history of these kind of epidemics, and I see that every time there's a serious loss of life, the various governments always try to cover it over. And I'm like, okay, there's nothing we can do about that. That's the way the bureaucracy works. But in New Orleans, we have a way of burying our dead, and we can, in decency and order, create an environment that puts these people to rest, not only locally, but globally, and say to the world, yeah, this little ragtag group out of New Orleans, we understand, appreciate, and acknowledge your loss, and here is how we're going to pay respect and homage to your loss. And that's when I brought it to the group said, yeah, that's a great idea. We could have very well just came right back and jumped right back into the parade genre, and I'm like, no, we have a bigger responsibility to see this thing in a much global effect. Right. In other words, let's open up the lens and look at this thing wider, because everything is so intergenerational and so close.
Appreciate
until you just can't, some things you just can't ignore. Right. And this is our way of paying homage for the folk who didn't get an opportunity, as Todd said, to see or even bury them. Yeah. You know what I mean? When you have a situation, when you have people dying and they're putting them in refrigerated trailers. Yeah. That's a deal. Right. That's.
We appreciate.
Yeah, that's a deal. So we're not trying to regurgitate it, but we are trying to say
we're going to do it right.
We respect it. Right. And we have some sympathy to your loss, our loss, locally, nationally, internationally, and that's how this came about. So it's a funeral. Right. It's a funeral. Yeah.
I mean, you all are doing it right.
Yeah, it's a funeral.
And it goes down in the legacy and the history of New Orleans. I want to thank both of you all for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. That's October 23rd. And again, if folks want those free tickets, they need to call
info@thebmol.org.
All right. I'll be there, and I'll see you all there.
Looking forward.
Thank
All
you.
right. We're going to have more of conversation, so stay right here. I'll be back.
Testing. Why did the girl ask the mushroom to dance? Because he was a fun guy.
Well, welcome back. October is recognized, among many things, as Depression and Mental Illness Month. In 2019, just prior to the coronavirus and the pandemic, 19.86% of adults experienced a mental illness, equivalent to nearly 50 million Americans. The national rate of suicide among adults has increased every year, and it's concerning. And that trend, especially with the onset of the coronavirus, has really exploded even more. And it's more alarming is the growing percentage of youth, the young people in the United States who are living with major depression and often commit suicide. Well, to help us with our mental health checkup, we are happy to have back in the studio Dr. Arnold James, who is our mental checkup specialist. Thank you for being back with us.
Always a pleasure to be here, Mr. Marshall.
Let's talk about that. You know, a lot of people sometimes confuse what we call grief and what they call the difference between grief and mourning. You
Absolutely.
know, which sometimes leads to people's confusion. So talk to us about that.
We use those words interchangeably, but they are two distinct reactions to a loss, and I'm using loss generally. We'll get specific on that in a moment. But when we talk about grief, we're talking about that internal emotional response to a loss. On the outside, people may not ever see your grief. When you express that grief in your outward presentation, those behaviors that you engage in to express that grief, that is what we call mourning. That would be your religious rituals, the things that you would do over time to acknowledge that the loss has occurred. That's a mourning, and mourning can be a period. Grief, I want to go back to the grief is that internal reaction to a loss. And if most people that would follow the Kubler-Ross model of this, there's stages to this grief. There's anger, there's depression, there's acceptance, there's all those different forms of the grief. That is not necessarily the mourning.
Right.
That is that internal psychological emotional response that you have to a loss. I said I wanted to go back to the sense of loss because usually when we in the conversation of grief and mourning, we're really most people are talking about the loss of a loved one,
right.
a person. I want to expand that understanding to grief. That grief response is a psychological response to any loss.
Yes.
That is a loss of a relationship, that is a divorce, that is a home, that is a job, that is anything that you've had emotional investment in that is no longer with you. Your psyche adjusts to that loss and transition. And so people say, people say sometimes, well, I don't know why you're worried about that. I don't know why you're worried about that. Well, if it meant something to you, your body is going to respond the same way.
Right, right. And you know what? I tell people all the time, you see people walking around, you think that everything's happy-go-lucky, but I see people sometimes who don't even realize that they are totally mentally ill, but functioning on a job, but totally ill.
Because, and sometimes we think a mental illness is something we need to have diagnosed, or it's the specific label for it. But we think a lot of us are walking around with life challenges, dilemmas, and we're having unresolved emotional responses to those dilemmas. So we're not living our full lives.
Right.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that you may be mentally ill, but it certainly is a prolonged distress that will interfere with people's way of living and the way that they deal with their relationships on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And you know what gets me too is that a lot of times people don't realize, like you said, some of the suicidal things come in because people become attached to things. You know, I won't mention a name, but I had a friend of mine whose sister had tons of money in the oil industry, and she almost went crazy because it was a situation where her, you know, the bottom fell out, and they had to sell their plane. And for us, it'd be like, get over it. But for them and their social status, she could not deal with that.
And that's why I don't like, but I want to bring attention to the whole concept of grief and mourning as it relates to any loss, because just because you don't understand the connection that someone has to even a material thing, the loss is still the same.
Right.
We're comfortable with a person, a loved one. There's a rhythm of life with that loved one. That loved one is suddenly not there. There's a complete reorganization that has to occur in your life. It seems if you lost a job and there's an income that provided a certain standard of living and a rhythm of living, take that away and you have to reorganize. That is that grief of that loss. Somebody say, well, how does that make sense? Your mind is not distinguishing between the object or the material.
Right.
It is just connecting to your sense of satisfaction, stability, and feeling safe. And when that is upset, then there's a disruption.
While I've got you here, I also want to talk to you about parents who've lost children in childbirth. You know, there's an organization that's coming together once a year in Slidell with a program called Walk to Remember on, I think it's Saturday the 15th. These parents will celebrate the lives of their children that were either stillborn or miscarriage. And anyone interested in participating in the Walk to Remember can call 985-643-6437 or 985-643-6437. Again, that same number. But the parents walked to Heritage Park from First Methodist Church in Slidell, and they released doves in memory of their lost babies. Dr. James, just, you know, and one of the things they talk about is that even though these people have other children, the loss of that child, it can become a real mental toll on them, and which can last for many years.
Again, we can't judge how long mourning will last. And when you think about something like pregnancy, and during that time period, there are certain aspirations that you have for this unborn child, and when those aspirations do not become fulfilled or unmet, there's an open void that needs to be filled, and that is what we call this mourning process. What are the rituals that fills that void of acknowledgement to satisfy some of the reaction to those aspirations that you had for that child? And
one thing people always say, please don't just, if you can't say the right thing to these people, just sit there and be with them. Like people will say, well, you'll have another child. Those are all the wrong things.
There's so many wrong things that we think we say out of what we think is good intention, but that's the last thing a person really needs to hear. You know, for example, well, I know how you feel. You know how you would feel, but you cannot know how I feel.
Right.
You know, it'll soon pass. It may pass for you, but you can't determine how it will pass for me. For me, it may be a lifetime struggle commensurate to the amount of emotional investment I had in the person or the loss. So we have to be more sensitive to people and say, if I see that you are going through something, I'm here for you in whatever way possible, in whatever way that you need, and not impose your values, your personal way of handling onto other people, and allow people to be where they are, where they need to be.
I can't say enough. That's exactly right. So we certainly hope that those people will get together later this month and find some type of intimacy among losing, children from miscarriage and stillbirths. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome.
And we always look forward to our mental moments with you, because you keep us mentally healthy.
That's my job. I want to make sure we are okay.
Okay. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a guy who you met earlier on the show, but for a totally different reason. Stay with us.
My daughter started making necklaces. She makes what we call affirmation fashion. I tell her every day that your black is beautiful. Your black is beautiful. Your black is beautiful. And if there's anything better than being beautiful, it's being smart. And if there's anything better than being smart, it's being kind. And reaffirming that every day is our method of making sure her chin never drops.
One of the country's most revered nonprofit programs, working with other respected housing initiatives, have helped thousands of families across the country to have homes of their own. The Enterprise Corporation singles out 40 people every year who work to make decent, affordable housing a reality for others. Among them was New Orleans' own Fred Johnson Jr., who was on the show earlier. He's the CEO of the Neighborhood Development Foundation, better known as NDF. Fred, we salute you and your small staff to help people's dreams of owning their own homes come true. Well, we're out of time. Thanks for keeping us company. Until next month, remember to stay in peace, not pieces, and always do something good for yourself and for someone else. We'll see you. Conversations with Ed Marshall is underwritten by EMA Consultants and Speakers Bureau, Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, SafePoint GPS, Delgado Community College, and OTP Poetry Anthology.